What's happening locally is actually a result of what's happening nationally and internationally. So it's hard to disconnect it, although everyone sitting here will ultimately be trying to solve the problem in Decatur, Illinois, and Macon County. And I'll start by saying that I was standing down by the border between the U.S. and Mexico one time with one of Chief Getz's detectives. And I said, well, there's ground zero. That's where, it all ends when the Border Patrol intercepts drugs coming across this country. And he looks at me and he says, no, that's where it starts. It ends in Decatur, Illinois, or Canton, Ohio, or wherever you want to go. So the idea that we're somehow disconnected from any of that is completely wrong. I think on the international scene, there's a lot of things you could talk about, but I think the most important two that are going to affect us going forward is cocaine production has soared in Colombia, and most of that it comes across either through Mexico or on the water. On the water, our Coast Guard is completely unable to deal with that threat, and I got lots of details, but I won't go into them, take too long, but it's a serious and significant threat, and it's probably going to get worse. That is something that will flow into this country in greater and greater amounts, and more difficult to intercept. The one that is really ought to scare everybody in this room is Mexico. Mexico looks a lot like an early development of Afghanistan, and that's a fact. They are growing more poppies today. As we legalize marijuana in the United States, they are taking thousands of acres of marijuana out of production, and they're putting poppies into production. So they are now the number one heroin, and have been for a while, but they are clearly the number one heroin producer for what comes into this country. I think the most important thing that I think about in law enforcement is that when I say it looks like Afghanistan, when you start growing poppies, it's very hard to stop growing them. It becomes something that is very hard to change. So not only do they look like Afghanistan in the sense of the drugs are starting to grow, but they are in a study that came out very recently, the second most violent country in the world behind Syria. And people don't understand that. If you could get a hold of the HIDA reports, which typically go to law enforcement, there are many sites on there you can go to and see people being butchered, literally, just like you would think that ISIS does. The cartels do it in Mexico, and they do it in the most vicious way that you can imagine. So the heroin and fentanyl production in Mexico is soaring, and it's coming into this country in a number of different ways. 50 to 70% of Mexico is now controlled by the cartels. What does that mean? It means the corruption has crossed into this country significantly. If you look, you don't read about this in Illinois, but if you look at the sheriffs, the police chiefs, sorry, Chief, and the politicians that are in prison today across Texas, primarily Texas, but also some in Arizona, it's mind-boggling, and they've made deals with the cartel. They're bringing, law enforcement and politicians are helping bring the drugs into this country because the amount of money is extraordinary. And so they are bribing people in this country just like they are everywhere else. And there was a recent DEA report a few weeks ago that had specifics about how the Zeta cartel, the Gulf cartel, where they're operating in Texas today. So that when the cartels get that kind of power in this country, it becomes impossible for us to deal with it at a local level because the flow is significant. Nationally, I would just say that, and I hate to pick on millennials, I'll probably get in trouble here, but you hear them say we want conflict diamonds, we want free trade coffee, we want positive social impact. It is amazing to me how people believe in that, but they'll say recreational marijuana is okay. There is no such thing that drugs are a victimless crime. You are supporting a cartel that is the most vicious and nasty organizations in the world. They're as bad as any terrorist organization. They are a terrorist organization. So the idea that by purchasing drugs, it's okay and it's some victimless crime, that is not true, and people have to understand that it's not true. And I just throw one more thing in there to wrap up real quick is it is also amazing to me that we criticize other countries for such corruption, And I call it legalized corruption. When you can hire 42 DEA agents, 33 of them out of the same area that regulate pharmaceutical companies and distributors, and you can hire them as consultants and lobbyists, and you hire them out of those positions to go to work for you so that you can figure out a way to kill more people in this country. To me, that's legalized corruption. And that is, we have to tackle that, and we have to tackle it at every level, including here locally.